Chapter 261. Government ruled. 4. And the next day there was a vote. Alonso was elected to the position of Archbishop. Amidst the cheers and enthusiastic atmosphere of the people, Alonso couldn't even refuse the position. He had no choice but to accept this burdensome role. But when he heard that the Archbishop would become Florida's ruler, he couldn't bear it. This had to be refused somehow. Wasn't this position created at the cost of so much blood? And yet, for me who did nothing to hold this position, especially since I am Spanish, it's absurd. With these thoughts, he had sent several messages to the Virginia side until today. There was no reply. Since we've met like this, let's walk to the destination together. We can talk. Until today. The soldiers who had been uncomfortably escorting Alonso until just now bowed their heads and stepped back when he encountered this person. Thus, the two walked in an awkward and solemn atmosphere. Unlike him, who appeared relatively comfortable, Alonso couldn't even look at the person beside him, because looking at him reminded him of that day. The shock of that day. The overwhelming feeling of that day. I am a person who has done nothing. I want to resign. Still, what needed to be said had to be said. Alonso struggled to open his mouth, and once he did, words flowed surprisingly freely. All I've done is help a few slaves escape, show a slightly kind attitude, and almost get beaten to death by vigilantes. And when I woke up, the Africans of this land had liberated themselves. At these words, he briefly turned to look at Alonso. "I see," was all he said in response. Feeling somehow frustrated by this calm reply, Alonso continued, "I am nothing. It was others who fought against the slave owners, others who helped the most slaves escape, and others who distinguished themselves in the recent battle. And it was you who was elected in the election. It seems people trust you. That's a good thing. Be a trusted archbishop. It's a good quality for a leader." That's what the nameless one said. Alonso couldn't help but refute that, so he said, "No. It's not me people trust most. That's already proven by the vote. Weren't you ineligible for the vote?" "That's right. The one people trust most is you." Only then did he turn to Alonso with a surprised expression. Alonso spoke with an earnest voice. "I didn't fight against the slave owners, but you did. And it was also you who helped the most slaves escape. Everyone knows you turned the tide in the recent battle." Silence. "Rather, you should rule this Florida. Nameless one, there is no better candidate than you." In Alonso's view, that was the most reasonable solution. Land ruled by an messenger. Land ruled by the most beloved, trusted, and respected person. Isn't that what's already happening in Virginia to the north? No, there's a reason why it must be him. The most decisive reason. Isn't this liberation also due to you? This victory is all your achievement. And then, no. Alonso was taken aback when he interrupted his words for the first time, stopping mid-sentence with his mouth open. They paused walking briefly and he looked at Alonso, then turned his head again and continued walking. "It is not my achievement." "What does that mean?" "Yes, of course, you said the outcome was in our hands, that we should believe in ourselves. But if you hadn't shown that miracle then and there, could we have one?" At those words, he walking ahead stopped again. As Alonso tried to approach his side, he turned around to face Alonso directly and said, "Why was I there at that time and place? What did you just say? Didn't you say it? That the miracle I performed ended the battle. Then what made me be there? Who called me to that place? Well, I came only after the slave uprising had already liberated themselves. It was those who chose to resist on their own that called me there. People who wanted to free themselves led me to that place." His face remained calm, but there was strength in his voice, a strength that seemed to dominate this space. As Alonso couldn't respond and just opened and closed his mouth, he suddenly smiled and started walking again. Alonso, who had been standing in a daze, hurriedly followed him. and the conversation continued. I was merely a catalyst and a conclusion. His voice was gentle, like a teacher instructing a child. Just like you. Yes, you may have done nothing. You were just a catalyst, and it was the slaves themselves who actually rose up. It will be the same in the future. They will be the ones who actually do things, even if you become archbishop. So accept it. Before they knew it, they had reached the center of San Agustin. People gathered, murmuring. You are not becoming the ruler of Florida's people. You are once again becoming a catalyst for Florida's people. Saying this, he raised his head and waved to the gathered spectators. As cheers erupted, he encouraged Alonso to wave as well. He too waved his hand. That's enough. You don't need to be the savior leading Florida's people to wealth and glory. If it's burdensome, let them do it. They had now reached the door. As he pushed the door open with both hands, many people were gathered inside the cathedral. Amidst the cheers of many people, Alonso looked up at him. He was smiling. It was a smile gentle enough to ease the heart, and intense enough to never be forgotten. Alonso knelt before that smile, and swore, I, as the Archbishop of Florida and representative of Florida's people, swear allegiance to you. I, as the Archbishop of Florida, will dedicate myself to Florida's people during my term. Thus, 6 months passed. It became the autumn of 1612. Alonso was busy going around, taking on the role of head of government for the first time in his life. Are there this many stacks of documents? Yes. Well, it's daily life in Virginia. He wasn't surprised by the amount of work. Rather, the method of handling affairs passed orally in a haphazard manner was less efficient than using these stacks of documents. Alonso was surprised purely by the sheer quantity of paper itself. He could hardly imagine where so much paper was coming from. Not just paper, but ink and various everyday miscellaneous items seemed somehow more abundant. And they were indeed more abundant. The products of Virginia's continuously developing industry were flowing freely into Florida at low prices. Considering transportation costs, this was much more profitable than exporting across the Atlantic. With a new market emerging very close by, many industrial shackles of Virginia were being released. Anyway, Alonso, unaware of such circumstances, continued to organize and process the documents, constantly thinking, and this won't do. He concluded, I need to negotiate with Virginia. Chapter 262, Market Expansion, 1. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith praises systematic division of labor, arguing that it maximizes labor productivity and thereby increases national wealth. And as everyone living in the 21st century knows, his claim was correct. Even in making a pin, having multiple people specialize in divided processes with mechanization and efficiency is far more productive than having a single craftsman control the entire pin-making process. Productivity can increase 10 to 100 times. Then, why did people only implement this good practice after the advent of modern capitalism? The reasons are quite diverse. A narrow market that couldn't realize economies of scale, lack of capital control over labor, and so on. First, when division of labor is implemented, each task becomes extremely simple. As everyone knows, such simple labor is very painful. But in Virginia? Why yes. Work needs to be this boring for the ascetic practice to be worthwhile. Ugh! After turning the spinning wheel for 10 hours straight, I feel like I'm getting closer to the Lord. Such obstacles were overcome? But the second obstacle, a more fundamental one, still remained unresolved. Let's look at the example of a pin factory from The Wealth of Nations. Brothers and sisters. Sisters in process number 1. Come and receive your equipment. Whir. Clang. 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 Clack, clack, clack. The labor efficiency of dividing into detailed processes, taking out wire, setting it up, bending it, and grinding it is 240 times superior to having a single craftsman handle all these processes. But what do we do with 240 times more pins? Don't you know? If supply increases without demand increasing, the economy falters from overproduction. Although Virginia's various factories and monasteries had managed to sustain themselves by producing frequently disappearing consumables, at most the Virginia market consisted of 100,000 people. And exporting pins to England? Who would specifically buy unfamiliar foreign pins with reduced price competitiveness due to added transportation costs? Eventually, Virginia's industry quickly became saturated and was on the verge of explosion. They tried bundling pins with gift trades with Native Americans, and citizens used consumables lavishly, feeling like they had become rich. But it was still just a 100,000-person market. That limitation was overcome with the integration of Florida. Florida is literally in a state of destitution with nothing left. After the uprising, war had swept through all of Florida, and with the economic connection to Spain severed, its internal organs were damaged. Then, they met Virginia. Virginia's factory owners shouted with joy and shipped massive quantities of products at low prices. At the same time, since Florida didn't have money to buy these products, they balanced the trade by purchasing cash crops and livestock such as cattle, sheep, goats, and horses from various parts of Florida. Simultaneously, with the Night Brigade greatly expanding in Florida, demand for tractors increased, and tractor parts factories expanded everywhere. This was the power of market expansion. Virginians could once again happily enjoy ascetic practices and profits. Naturally, they also feasted on various meats coming from Florida. However, I'm not sure if this situation is acceptable. There are many problems. The gold and valuables left by the Spanish in Florida are running out. Despite everything, Florida was a newly independent, poor colony. It was difficult to maintain trade balance while handling all the volume Virginia was pouring out. Assets were unilaterally flowing out. Moreover, as mentioned earlier, there were also significant concerns about the Night Brigade's massive expansion in Florida. Isn't the Night Brigade ultimately affiliated with Virginia? Now they grow crops on our land and distribute them free to our poor. Plus, they protect our land for us. It's something to be grateful for, but, right? A relationship of only giving and receiving can't last long. Alonso, who had become Florida's leader, responded with a sigh to his assistant's words. Of course, the possibility of Virginia acting with malice toward Florida converged to zero. Everyone knew that, because they all believed in him. Trade issues wouldn't last long. As time passed, Florida would likely become wealthy like Virginia. Once the Night Brigade was widely established in Florida, Florida too could make significant profit from grain exports. The residents would become wealthy, and naturally, the trade balance would improve as well. Moreover, Virginia was also providing many conveniences for them. This was evident in how they were buying lots of fruits from Florida that they didn't particularly need. However, anxiety might erupt before the trade issues are resolved. Things couldn't continue like this. A knot needed to be tied. Anxiety was rising among Floridians. More precisely, it was anxiety arising among the natives. Alonso recalls a conversation he had recently with a tribal chief. Actually, my daughter married into the Apalachee tribe 2 years ago. Oh, congratulations. It's not something to congratulate. Haven't the tribes driven out by the Apalachee become our overlords? Not overlords. I heard they swore allegiance to your great chief. Let's continue. Anyway, even if they've become our overlords, it doesn't matter to us. But if the Apalachee are threatened, my daughter and grandchildren will all be in danger. They won't harm our people. Did you make such a promise? No. Or do you have leverage against them? That's not it either. Are we stronger than them? We're weaker. That's how it was. At minimum, a relationship of equality with Virginia had to be maintained. Otherwise, those who made up the largest portion of Florida would tremble with anxiety, their hearts filled with a growing unease that could spread like wildfire through the settlements and villages. The delicate balance of power, so carefully cultivated over years of diplomatic negotiation, would teeter on the edge of collapse. The natives, If the majority distrusted the Florida government and took a confrontational stance with Virginia, that would mean the collapse of Florida. Would Florida become as wealthy and powerful as Virginia through Virginia's consideration first? Or would fearful and anxious Indians who were preemptively worried overthrow this government first? That was the problem. With a sigh, Alonso scrawled his signature with Virginia-made ink on Virginia-made paper and sank into contemplation. This concern. Chapter 263, Market Expansion, 2, seemed like it would last for quite a while, and it didn't take long for this prediction to be proven correct. An incident occurred. Ahem. In Florida, knights easily became objects of admiration. First, it was knights who defeated the army of those evil slave owners, and it was also knights who reclaimed abandoned land and distributed it free to Floridians. Above all, crash. The winner of this jousting tournament is Sir Rodrigo. Really, Sir Rodrigo won. Jousting tournaments were cool. Even without jousting tournaments, it didn't matter. Just watching them control mechanical devices taller than a person, defeating enemies, and incidentally plowing fields smoothly was impressive enough. Floridians felt the kind of exhilaration that 21st century people feel when watching giant mecha shows. It didn't take long for the Knight Brigade members, already marinated in Knight obsession, to half-evolve. Devolution is also evolution into medieval people. Help! That basket! What's the matter? The basket containing gold fell over there. What do? I need to exchange that for food to survive this winter. And Sir Skinner, as a knight thoroughly infused with Knight obsession, couldn't ignore the native's call. Shouldn't he fulfill the honorable duty of a knight by helping the weak? Of course, everyone had forgotten that originally in Virginia, the duty of an agricultural equipment knight was merely to adhere to safety guidelines. Ha. Don't worry. A basket like that, somehow I'll handle it. Sir Skinner, who had stepped forward gallantly, realized that the basket was hanging in the middle of a 11-meter-high cliff and pondered seriously. No, I'm not a superhuman. I just drive a large tractor. In the fear of death, Sir Skinner briefly regained his sanity and was about to refuse, choosing life over honor. Sob, what should we do? Our tribe is doomed. It's okay. There's a village of people from across the sea nearby, so if we seek refuge there, abandoning the place where we've lived all our lives? But after hearing these words, the knight Mr. will save it. I believe so. And after hearing this, ha. Of course, little one. I'll retrieve it for you. He simply couldn't back down. And the moment Sir Skinner grabbed the basket, his strength gave out and he fell 11 meters down the cliff. Surprisingly, the problem didn't arise at this point. Ha. The Lord surrounds the righteous with favor as with a shield. Psalm 5 verse 12. Ha. Sir Skinner, sliding down the cliff slope, landed precisely on the soft bushes below, saving his life. Tage, thank you. We are deeply indebted to you. Our clan will always welcome you. Ha, not at all. Let's talk after I digest the food first. Quack. What's happening? Call the shaman first. After that, Sir Skinner suffered from digestive issues after eating unfamiliar Florida native food. But even that wasn't the problem. To cause such suffering to our benefactor is shameful for us. Ha. Not at all, Chief. Let's first talk about other important matters. Around the second day of being bedridden, Sir Skinner momentarily escaped from night obsession and regained his reason. And he recalled what his duty was. For free, you cultivate the land? Yes, that's what we normally do. It's our gift to you. Oh, so that's why people recognized him as the great chief. Expansion and prosperity of the community. Using his status as a benefactor, he went around preaching to clan members about the right to 25 hectares. And the clan members, enticed by this, soon resolved to join the Florida Archbishopric. Thus, a missionary came to this village, and just when everything seemed to be going well, thud. What? How can you cultivate this land to distribute to them when it's our tribe's territory? Give us something in return. Roughly, another tribe came and started making unreasonable demands. Sir Skinner quickly went to the clan people and asked. They told him that it was originally a place where everyone fished, but the other tribe was making unreasonable claims. Hearing this, it seemed that the other tribe had frequently invaded and plundered this weaker side. At this, Sir Skinner's heart, unable to tolerate injustice, couldn't help but rise like wildfire. Look, this isn't developed yet. If you give us something of value here, what? The people from the neighboring tribe, who were speaking like gangsters trying to extort protection money from a development site, were all pushed aside by the tractor. Of course, no one was hurt. Sir Skinner was honorable, after all. Why you suddenly push into our tribal territory? This is an outrage. Great Chief? No, was it Archbishop? Help us. But as is often the case with those who threaten and intimidate, they only sought authority at times like this. I am innocent. I only pursued honor as a knight. That's right. They are slandering the knight. The knight even saved our puppy. Sir Skinner spoke as he always did, with an upright attitude. As both sides confronted each other fiercely, this seems to be a problem I cannot handle alone. What do you mean? Aren't you the great chief of this place? Alonso declared. But isn't that knight a Virginian? There was no problem with his statement itself. He couldn't arbitrarily intervene in a matter caused by a Virginian belonging to the Knight Brigade, a Virginia organization. There was no precedent for this yet. If he wanted to do anything, he had to somehow coordinate with Virginia. But to the Florida natives who heard the news, it didn't sound that way. So, are you saying we can't respond no matter what the Virginia tribe people do? And such thinking wasn't entirely wrong. Although it hadn't happened yet, the current archbishopric didn't have the conditions to independently punish crimes committed by Virginia citizens. At that point, anxiety among Florida natives rose like wildfire. What if they come here claiming to settle grudges from being expelled from this land? Many of those Virginians must have been victims back then. With this anxiety, people gathered in front of the archbishop's residence. After pondering, Alonso quickly sent a report to Virginia. The issue of setting the relationship between the two countries, the issue of the Knight Brigade's nationality, and various other factors mixed in. It was a very complex problem. A problem that would perplex both countries for a while. Chapter 264. Market Expansion 3. Just to reiterate, I went through a lot. I experienced a massive explosion show literally in the center, and afterward, as soon as I woke up, I unexpectedly performed an embarrassing strip show. Anyway, after barely winning the battle, I had to discipline some crazy knight fellows, and suddenly I had to stop natives from fighting each other. Truly, since the battle in Florida, I've been running without a moment to breathe. Anyway, I thought I might finally get some rest now. That's what I thought, but reports keep coming in about whether our Knight Brigade should be active in the Florida Archbishopric. That's not all. And regarding this recent matter with Sir Skinner, the Archbishop in Florida. What's this? The work is doubling? Actually, this result was predictable. First of all, our sphere of influence has doubled in size, so it would be strange if the work didn't increase. And it's not just that the landmass doubled. Tens of thousands of liberated Africans, and even more natives, have now come under our control. No, to be precise, under my control. The relationship between Virginia and Florida was that ambiguous and peculiar. Virginia's government and church stand and move centered around my authority, and at the same time, Florida's archbishop swears allegiance to me as my vassal. But it's not like I hold some official position in Virginia. Union of Crowns? That's also ambiguous to say. Allied nations? They're too close to each other for that. Vassal state? To be honest, the third one seems closest. Economically dependent, military stationed, and even Florida's head of government swears allegiance to me. No, I am not an evil imperialist. Although 5 of my 6 apostles are from England and Spain. Anyway, I am not an imperialist. I took a deep breath to drive away these idle thoughts, then carefully re-examined the problems at hand. The problems were numerous. The Night Brigade members' mistake in Florida, balancing trade with Florida, incorporating Florida's natives, and so on. There are other important matters as well. These two countries have a common enemy in Spain. Then how should the armies move together? Night Brigade members would need to be active in Florida, but then what about the nationality issue of the Night Brigade? Does the Night Brigade belong to Virginia or to Florida? Should it be divided? When a Virginian lives in Florida, or a Floridian lives in Virginia, under which legal order will they live? These problems arose from different fields and different points, but in my view, the source of all these problems was clear. Isn't it because the relationship between Virginia and Florida is unclear? It's not just a simple alliance. It's also ambiguous to call it a traditional European union of crowns. And there's nothing established about what the relationship between Virginia and Florida should be, or how to handle affairs between them. Therefore, it needs to be established. If everything becomes clear, the anxiety of Florida's natives will subside, and these trivial problems won't emerge one by one and become inflated. Reassurance must be given. People need to be clearly told that Florida will be equal and on the same level as Virginia. And, Nemo? What is it? The Archbishop of Florida has arrived. It seems I wasn't the only one with such thoughts. The Archbishop of Florida came to Chesapeake, leading a dozen people. I was about to quietly invite him to Crotone. Nameless one, I have much to tell you. Yes, I already know from the reports. Then.
No.
The situation has become more serious than when I reported. The Indians have gathered to protest, and they've begun blocking the paths where knights travel. The situation was more serious than I thought. With such a matter, it would be better for me to stay in Chesapeake to maintain quick communication with the Assembly and the Council of Six. What is needed right now is trust. We need to instill in them the belief that Virginia's goodwill will make Florida healthier, and that there is absolutely no ill intent. Trust, huh? I thought for a moment, and I recalled numerous events from history that I knew. Will such events only happen with Florida in the future? I don't think so. We can't simply merge all those natives into Virginia. They already have their own independent political bodies, and the territories they occupy are larger than most major European countries. We will eventually face similar problems with them too. This is just the first time, not the last. So I said, when people on Earth give each other trust, they make firm oaths and promises. What? As always, pretending to be an angel who doesn't know much about human culture. So, let's do the same. I clapped my hands to awaken Alonso's spirit and said, let's establish a covenant between Virginia and Florida. Covenant? Alianza, you say? Yes. A covenant that will eventually include numerous other countries beyond Florida. At my words, Alonso nodded and left, and I convened the Assembly and the Council of Six. They immediately got to work. Virginia's capital. The spacious meeting space was filled with tension. Everyone gathered in their seats was staring at the table without making a sound. They too were vaguely thinking about it, about how this moment would be recorded in history. It was an important moment. And on the table, where everyone's gaze was focused during this important moment, was a thin booklet. It was a booklet completed by many people who had worked day and night for the past few weeks. Its content wasn't long, but each phrase contained the concerns of numerous people. But that booklet was still incomplete. One procedure was needed for it to be complete. And to carry out that procedure, click, someone had to be here. When that someone entered Virginia's capital, everyone seated rose. He walked to the center of the conference hall and lifted the booklet from the table. Now there's no turning back. Those words were a solemn declaration. You have gathered here to represent the citizens of two communities. These words you've published will represent the will of tens of thousands and determine the lives of millions. The Lives of Millions. Chapter 265. Market Expansion. 4. How many people directly belong to the community now? Even combining Virginia and Florida, it would be just slightly over 300,000. In such a situation, he speaks of the lives of millions. Those gathered here could easily guess what thoughts occupied his mind. He was discussing a future where this political body would become bigger and greater. And that future wasn't difficult to envision. That future seemed very close. Their trade network is expanding. Along with it, many Americans naturally head directly to Virginia and are incorporated into the community. Thus, their territory expands westward. At the same time, thousands of immigrants are flooding in from the British Isles across the Eastern Ocean every year. Those suffering from long wars and population pressure come over dreaming of a wealthy life here. Probably within 10 years, the population of Virginia and Florida will easily exceed 400,000. Perhaps in the next 10 years it might exceed 600,000. And as 10 years and another 10 years pass, eventually it will exceed 1 million and then 2 million. Someday this small political body might become larger than England and France. This entire North America might become their land. A land wider than Europe. On that day, how will this moment be remembered? Those whose thoughts reached that far could only look at him without even swallowing their saliva. Then the nameless one slowly turned the pages of the booklet and recited line by line, "All those under this covenant are free and equal. Is there anyone who does not agree with this?" There was no one. Slavery is prohibited in all lands where this covenant has effect. Is there anyone who does not agree with this? Again, there was no one. All countries under this covenant maintain freedom, independence, mutual fraternity, cooperation, and peace. They fight together, maintain sovereignty together, trade together, and exist together. Is there anyone who does not agree with this? Silence upon silence continued. The Night Brigade and various organizations and groups described below all pledge allegiance to this covenant and do not belong to any single country. And all those under this covenant enjoy equal rights and freedom of movement in all countries belonging to this covenant. The silence gradually added weight. All countries under this covenant will send one representative with a 4-year term to form the Continental Assembly, and through this create common laws and mediate conflicts. The lines interlocked like bones, blood vessels, and muscles to give birth to a single living being. Under these covenants, Virginia and Florida, and the many countries that might join in the future, will cooperate in the fields of joint defense, economy, industry, and more. They will face common enemies, solve common problems, and move toward common goals. This is called a commonwealth. Here, an artificial life called a nation was being born, dressed in bones and muscles made of written lines. Blood of mutual consent and trust just began to flow through its veins. And is there anyone who does not agree with this continental covenant? That life form had just exhaled its first breath. Kin Issei, for a few seconds, looks around. He carefully examines whether some madman might say, "I object," and cause trouble. And relieved that no one did such a strange thing, Kin Issei closes the booklet. With all processes successfully completed, only the declaration of the end remained. Very well. Then now. Wait a moment. At that time, someone shouted. Turning toward the sound, Walter Raleigh was standing there. Given that he was the one who had contributed the most to drafting this covenant, Kin Issei stammered in confusion. What is it? Nemo, no, we've missed something really important. We've missed the most important thing. How did we forget? How is it that, among the hundreds here, not one person raised an issue? Kin Issei tilted his head at Raleigh's words. What on earth had they forgotten? The rights of each individual belonging to the covenant, the authority of each country, and the authority of the government they would form together. Nothing had been omitted. After all, having thrown in and mixed the Japanese Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and the covenants of the natives that Kin Issei knew, there should be nothing missing. We didn't decide on a name. Except for that. A name. The most important thing. As people began to stir, saying things like, "Come to think of it," and "Why didn't I know that?" The solemn scene instantly became chaotic. At that moment. Then, do we need to rewrite the covenant from the beginning? Stop! Don't you understand yet? This time, Thomas Hewitt opened his mouth. Although Kin Issei was worried about what strange talk might come out, he listened to his words. Nemo, humble before the Lord, refers to himself as the Nameless One, though it was taken from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Also, our church, continuing Nemo's will, is called the Unnamed Church. Haven't we gathered here to build a political body that exalts only the name of the Lord? To build a truly just, equal, and eternally shining country that will be used as the Lord's instrument. Would such a country need a name? What kind of name would it need? Adam gave names to all livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. This is a verse from Genesis 2 verse 20. The Lord gave Adam the right to name, making him the king of the world. Therefore, we dare not name this political body, because it will be greater than all of us. Because it will be the greatest community to realize the Lord's will. The representatives of the two countries, who until just now seemed to have no particular thoughts, began to make expressions as if they had just realized something significant, and looked at Kin Issei. Indeed, during all that commotion, the Nameless One remained completely unshaken. Amazing! Of course, Kin Issei had maintained this position through misconception and deception for over 20 years. Displaying acting skills that no ordinary human could match, he made an expression that seemed to say, I skipped over it because it was too obvious. Thank you for mentioning it, Hewitt. Everyone was convinced by his remarkable ability to convey emotion. Seeming to gain confidence from Kin Issei's expression, Hewitt continued, if there is anyone who could name this community, it would only be the Lord himself. For humanity, to make humanity like angels. Hallelujah! People soon applaud and rejoice at Hewitt's passionate speech. And Kin Issei quietly nods and thinks, no, still there should be a name. Of course, he couldn't say such a thing in this atmosphere. So he just stood there with a trustworthy, splendid expression and upright posture. Whatever the case may be. Hurrah! For the birth of this continental covenant. Hallelujah! We are now forever the people of the covenant. Long live the covenant. Long live the Union. History would record this solemn moment as the moment when the Continental Covenant was ratified. As a holy, glorious, and great moment. In such a moment of exaltation, only Kin Issei continued to sweat and think. Surely there should be a name, right? How about USA? Anyway, the hastily created Union agreed to have a joint military, joint laws, and a joint economic zone. Those provisions immediately began to operate. Chapter 266. Market Expansion. 5. Preamble. We, the citizens of all countries under the influence of this covenant, establish this covenant and swear by our own conscience to protect and expand justice, peace, and freedom. Section 1. All those under the effect of this covenant are free and equal. All humans possess equal rights toward freedom, and based on these natural principles, we establish this holy political body. Section 2. All countries under the effect of this covenant maintain freedom, independence, mutual fraternity, cooperation, and peace. They fight together, maintain sovereignty together, trade together, and exist together. Matters concerning war, diplomacy, trade, and sovereignty are monopolized by the Union bound by the covenant. Section 11. All countries under the effect of this covenant agree to mint and use currency from a single source. The right to issue and circulate this single currency is monopolized by the Union bound by the covenant. Amendment of the covenant is only possible after resolution through consent of more than 3/4 of the Continental Assembly. The Continental Covenant will endure perpetually and will serve humanity forever. For humanity equals. The completed covenant was just a collection of written lines, meticulously penned on parchment with careful calligraphy but otherwise unremarkable in appearance. It sat quietly in its protective leather binding, seemingly no different from countless other political documents throughout history. This covenant didn't bring about any remarkable technological revolution, nor did it cause any special social repercussions when first introduced. No grand parades celebrated its creation, no immediate economic booms followed its implementation, and the daily rhythms of life continued unchanged in the weeks after its signing. Qin Issei simply thought, since it's like a constitution, I should just write good words. He approached the task with practical simplicity rather than legal sophistication. After all, Qin Issei wasn't a legal scholar but a grape farmer whose hands were more accustomed to pruning vines than drafting political frameworks. The vineyard had been his true classroom, not the halls of universities where constitutional theory was debated. Thus, the covenant only showed the basic functions and roles of a nation, even by 17th century standards. If anything could be considered innovative, it would be the mention of individual equality. Moreover, few people were interested in these written lines. At most, the preamble and final sentence of the covenant were quoted here and there because they sounded nice, but that was all. Still, it was fortunate that Archbishop Alonso had something substantial to take to the American natives of Florida. Thanks to that, Florida was saved from an untimely invasion by American natives. But that wasn't all. It seems that a huge tribe called Florida in the South has joined. Yes, together with Virginia, two countries have formed a union. Now that these two countries are strongly united through a covenant, we will become even more powerful. You and us. Wait. Pardon. Is our tribe not included in your us? That's. First, the news spread to tribes within Virginia's trade network. I hear that it's not just about trading, but if you join with you folks, these knights will plow the land for you. That's correct. I thought we had to scatter our tribe and all and become members of another tribe, but now we just need to join this covenant? Yes, that's right. Could we join too? They immediately asked missionaries and merchants. If you meet the conditions. And they answered like that. That was the beginning. The Shawnee tribe, the Iroquois Confederacy, and the Wabanaki Confederacy have rallied all the surrounding tribes. Yes, they're saying they want to join our covenant. Just because of written lines, everything began to change. Winter of 1612. Hundreds of thousands of natives, forming groups as nations, came to join the covenant. Most were tribes already part of the multi-level network. After appropriate screening, it seemed that at least 2 or 3 new countries would join the covenant. Do they have an adequate population? Do they have control over a sufficient territory? Do they have a sufficiently democratic and rational government system in Qin Issei's view? Do they meet the conditions set forth in the covenant, such as equality for all and the prohibition of slavery? If they hadn't been screened based on such conditions, perhaps more than a dozen countries would have newly joined the covenant. However, even though such unfortunate incidents were prevented through screening by the Continental Assembly, problems still remained. Their population numbers at least tens to hundreds of thousands. And to all that population, Virginia had to gift the right to 25 hectares. Those who wish to become knights, come here. Great rewards await you. Venture into uncultivated rough lands and glory in conquering vast territories. Naturally, knights, squires, and technicians were needed. A lot of them. Oitoten sweated as he declared that the number of knights would double, quadruple, and octuple. Moreover, with so many knights, there was no choice but to create a new martial position above the captain. Otherwise, the knight commander's residence in White Castle might have drowned in a sea of paperwork. Now everyone look and memorize. This length is called 1 meter. Of course, the process of training knights and technicians had to be approached more systematically than before. Otherwise, the knights and technicians wouldn't be able to handle the influx of newcomers. Thus, knight schools and mechanic schools were newly established in Chesapeake. Even without being an educational scholar, just by sharing the tests and group activities he had experienced in modern education, Qin Issei caused a significant leap forward in the field. This way, within a few months, they were able to catch their breath regarding manpower supply. But no matter how important people are, nothing can be accomplished with people alone. No matter how well-trained a farmer is, without machinery, he can't do twice as much as others. He can't plow fields twice as fast as others, nor can he sow twice as many seeds. But with machinery, it's possible. That is, with a tractor, it's possible. Here, tractors were a knight's warhorse, lance, and armor all in one. Tens or hundreds of such tractors became necessary. Chapter 267. Market Expansion. 6. The embodiment of future technology that emerged 200 years earlier than in the original history due to Qin Issei's intervention, a product of a highly developed industrial society. If one tries to mass-produce such an item, let's move. Hurry. Bring the coal. It was naturally impossible with current methods. The gradually spreading reverberatory furnace-based ironworks expanded on a much larger scale than before. The molten iron spewing from there formed the framework of tractors. And conveyor belts were set up in every factory. And numerous industrial monastics stood in their places, meditating devoutly. They efficiently assembled giant tractors in front of the noisily moving belts. Such factories were built by the dozens. Of course, brick factories were needed to produce the bricks to build these factories. So the Virginians built brick factories. Then ships and harbors were needed to transport the produced tractors. So they built ships. Roads were also needed to move tractors on land. So paths were dug and moderately filled with gravel, extending in all directions. In this situation, raw material prices had to be kept low. Conveniently, many bandits and former slave owners captured in Florida chose mines as their penal colonies, extracting cheap iron ore and coal. As numerous factories were built near Chesapeake, people naturally flocked to work. As various villages merged, a massive city with tens of thousands of people grew in Chesapeake, which was already gathering population thanks to the marketplace. Of course, it wasn't as if they hadn't predicted this situation when building the factories. Qin Issei standardized city buildings and roads appropriately and laid simple sewage systems underneath to prevent epidemics. And Qin Issei invited Elizabeth there, to Chesapeake, which had become the center of the community. Goodness! Can it change this much in just a few months, a few years? When you last came here, the population was probably around 10,000. Then what is it now? 30,000. Population of 30,000. Such a large city was rare even in England. In the original history, London should have been trending to surpass 200,000 in population, but due to rebellions and turmoil, it was just barely hanging on at the level of 100,000. But Elizabeth wasn't surprised merely by the size of the population. She briefly looked up at the half-completed cathedral bell tower. The principle was simple. When Qin Issei's wristwatch vibrated with an alarm, the bell ringers rang the bells accordingly. Thus, the citizens of Chesapeake were informed of the time. That bell tower was the command center of this city. When the bell rang 9 times, people immediately left their homes and flocked to the roads, forming clouds. Then they rushed into factories, offered simple prayers, and entered into sacred labor asceticism. Then when noon came and the bell rang 12 times, they would come out and buy lunch from street vendors. And during commuting times, lunch times, and quitting times, those belonging to monasteries would recite to inspire loyalty to the community and work motivation. Yong, dong, dong, dong. We, the citizens of all countries under the influence of this covenant, establish this covenant and swear by our own conscience to protect and expand justice, peace, and freedom. Dong, 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 dong. The Continental Covenant will endure perpetually and will serve humanity forever. For humanity. For humanity. For humanity. For humanity. Dong, 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 dong. And then people dispersing back to their respective factories. It was amazing. Just in terms of scale, England should have had a center tens of times more magnificent and wealthy than Virginia and its union, given that its population was tens of times larger. But the reality was different. The vast waves of commuting people, the sound of that oath echoing everywhere at set times every day, and the quick and regular hand movements of those self-proclaimed monastics were placing this new city on a massive bedrock. Elizabeth marveled at this, while Qin Issei thought that they had finally gotten a bit closer to the 21st century as he looked around the factories. Virginia was prospering. No, it wasn't just Virginia. Far away in Florida, factories were also being built. Also, considering the massive number of tractors and knights heading to Florida, one could expect how much grain would soon come from Florida. The same was true for other member countries. The gift trade network became denser, new large plantations were established everywhere, and everyone was becoming wealthy. It was now 1615. In just 2 to 3 years, everything had changed. Elizabeth had seen many cities larger than this. No, she had lived in such cities for almost her entire life. But she had never seen this kind of city. She had never once seen an industrial city. Come? Ah, thank you. Anyway, Elizabeth hadn't come here for sightseeing. She led her old and tired body, receiving help from Kin Issei, and barely climbed the stairs toward the Council of Six building. As Kin Issei led the way and opened the door, she was soon able to meet the members of the Council of Six. Facing them, Elizabeth sat down, and she said, "Magnificent. It was a spectacular sight I hadn't seen in a long time. Thank you. Anyway, let's keep the greetings to this much. Shouldn't we discuss the practical matters now?" The Queen said, "Does the Union now inherit the treaties that Virginia had previously made?" "That's correct." "Then, the treaty document. Here it is." The Queen and her advisors carefully examined the paper handed by Kin Issei, who sat across from the Queen. There didn't seem to be any problematic clauses, but there's a blank. "You still haven't decided?" "The name of the country, Nemo has deliberately chosen not to decide on a name. This is for humility before God and this political bodies." "I understand well, but it cannot be left blank indefinitely. Can it?" "Come, tell me, nameless one." The Queen, smiling like a mischievous child, forced Kin Issei to make a choice. "What will you write?" And the moment the Queen spoke, the bell rang outside the window, exactly 12 times. Then soon, monastics who had come out to the streets for break time began to murmur. "The Continental Covenant will endure perpetually and will serve humanity forever." And Kin Issei inadvertently murmured, "Continental Covenant," the name of the covenant that had led them here years ago. Hearing this, Hewitt silently wrote that name in each of the blank spaces on the treaty document without missing any. The Continental Covenant. That became the name of this nameless union. Chapter 268. Kin Issei Superstar 1. It was only then that I felt I had received the true word of the Lord. Archbishop Alonso preached to the gathered believers. When holy breath was breathed into a body molded from earth, he was resurrected. His revival was like the Lord resurrecting Lazarus. His eyes widened as he recalled the shock of that moment. Among those listening to the sermon, some who had witnessed the scene firsthand stirred, telling those next to them that this was the absolute truth. Anyone who calls this the work of the devil is undoubtedly a devil worshipper, since giving and taking life is his power, his domain. How could it be possible that the devil enabled it? As the people who had gathered in front of the cathedral to hear the Archbishop's sermon nodded, Alonso recalled the memory of that day once more. When he opened his eyes, everyone knelt. They were not merely kneeling before an angel who had come back to life before their eyes. What they truly worshipped was the authority behind him, a celestial authority higher than any worldly power. The Lord is with his messenger, the one who rose from the ashes, the true messenger of the Lord, the one who knows no death, having not received Adam's original sin. And the nameless one, he can still recall the first words he spoke upon awakening. "Is the fight over?" Even after enduring the pain of voluntarily entering the flames, those were the words he calmly uttered as soon as he awoke. Before the miracle that happened to him, there was no sign of surprise. That attitude, as if his resurrection was completely natural. That firm faith. Is this the certainty that only a holy spiritual being created by the Lord could possess? While humans in the flesh always doubt, agonize, and fear, but he just looked around with a pure attitude, like a child newly born into the world. He asked people if the fight was over, sent words of warning to the Spanish, and thus concluded everything. He put the final period on that battle that day. That overwhelming presence. He could not forget. When he looked down upon them with a naked body like newly created Adam. Equals. Accepting something through sensory organs, and then responding through motor organs. That's the most basic process through which the human mind operates. From removing your hand when touching something hot, to crying when hearing moving music, to smiling while touching the face of someone you love. Everything is built on this foundation. And when all sensory organs that receive information from the world disappear from me, and when all motor organs that intervene in the world disappear, when only my undying essence remains in me, my mind gradually became diluted and meaningless. And, flash, like lightning, light returned to me. I opened my eyes, and through the image formed on my retina, I rekindled the dying embers of existence. I could once again exist on this material world. The feeling of having briefly lost existence itself and then recovering it. It sounds grand when I say it like this, but it feels like I just dozed off and woke up. Specific time and space were deleted, and the world moved on without me. I inhale. Clean lungs fill with a mixture of burnt smell and the scent of blood. I clench and unclench my hand. I feel the soft touch of my clean, freshly molded skin. In my ears, I hear the crackling of something still burning, the sound of wind, and people's breathing. Before my eyes, many people are kneeling and trembling. As soon as I felt all these sensations, I knew. I've been resurrected. Again. I've been resurrected. And those who witnessed it are worshiping me. Wait, something feels empty. It didn't take long to realize the nature of that emptiness. Hyuk, a person has risen from the dead. From the dead. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. And I desperately tried not to look down. My face felt hot and red, but at least there were still embers around, so it probably wouldn't be noticeable. Where are my clothes? Again, this is the second time. Last time, at least I had some rags left from the fire, but why is there not even a scrap of cloth now? No, that's not the urgent issue. First, I need to clear away the people around. Father! Oh, Lord! This won't do. This is absolutely not the time. I very slowly, with a kind smile, a puzzled expression, and in a way that didn't look awkward at all, quickly scanned my surroundings. And there wasn't even a scrap of cloth to cover my body, let alone an obstacle to block people's gazes. Moreover, I'm standing on some ash heap, and thousands of people are kneeling, wailing, and looking at me, like I've climbed onto a stage for everyone to see. My face was gradually reddening to the point of bursting, but fortunately, the angel smile that had been fixed on my face for decades was maintaining my poker face. Well, all right. First, I should assess the situation. Is it over? What's going on? Why is no one answering? Is the fight over? No. Don't just pray. Listen to what I'm saying. Seeing the people still silent, I hurriedly descended from the ash heap, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Shame that made me want to faint, tension, embarrassment, and various other complicated feelings. Even as I descended, I walked down gracefully and with dignity through the angel sovereign walk, tentative name, that I had honed for 20 years. Anyway, now that I had moved to a place where people's gazes were slightly obscured, I finally had the mental space to assess my surroundings. It's ambiguous. At least the enemies seem to have been crushed and are crying and making a fuss, but honestly, in terms of quantity and quality, they could overwhelm our forces at any moment if they regained their senses. This isn't good. What if these guys go all in and finish us all off? Then I won't be an angel anymore. I'll just be a Florida man and a demon dragged to Spain. No, absolutely not. I quickly racked my brain. Would it be resolved if I recited the 7th verse from my Enemy Morale Reduction Bible verse preset? No, the enemy's numbers are still too great for that. Raise the war cry, you nations, but you will be shattered. Isaiah 8 verse 13. I compromised with preset verse number 4. Yes, in my opinion, it's the fourth most effective verse in the entire Bible, so somehow, arg. Yes, it's effective. Chapter 269. Kin Issei Superstar 2. I immediately walked over to any Spanish soldier nearby. I grabbed his chin, lifted it, and quickly whispered something like, "It's not too late yet. Ugh. Hoo. We'll lay down our weapons. We surrender. Please have mercy." Then the Spanish soldiers one by one threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Our forces cheered. Good. Now the situation is generally resolved. Long live the Nameless One. What? Nameless One. Suddenly, people, our forces, rush toward me, grab my body, and lift me up. I'm debating whether to show signs of confusion or not, but seeing the excited faces of these people, they seem determined not to listen to anything I say. Let's show his resurrected body to all the enemies. Let's show what a miracle is to those who haven't yet thrown down their weapons. Wua! You bastard! Who are you? Who shouted such a thing? Wuaea! No. Nemo! 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 I said no. What are you doing? What are you doing in front of thousands of people? No, don't do that. Ararg. Equals. Ararg. How embarrassing. It was a dream, recalling the memory of that day. Ugh. Hoo. Seriously, couldn't someone have at least given me clothes? Not a single person asked if I was cold. Of course, I understand the symbolism of a naked body, but still, it's a violation of human rights. Looking around, fortunately, there was only a bed and furniture. My privacy was safely preserved. The place where I'm changing into pajamas while recalling the terrible memories of the past is Chesapeake. I'll be staying here for a while since there's expected to be a lot of work regarding Florida and other matters. I sighed, put on my outer clothes and tied my shoelaces. I grabbed my tablet and stepped outside into the autumn of 1612. Nameless One. Nemo. Hello. If a 21st century Japanese person were to ask me what it feels like to live as an angel, I've wondered how I should answer. I'm talking about when I expected a status window to appear with phrases like, mission failure condition, death. When I thought I might return home soon. Anyway, even though that was more than 20 years ago, my thoughts remain similar. The feeling of living as an angel hasn't changed much from then to now. Ha. Hello? It feels like being a celebrity and politician combined. In the sense that whether I'm having a bad day or just stubbed my little toe on a bookshelf, I have to smile regardless. Don't politicians also shake hands with anyone who approaches them? Ha. Everyone, please continue your efforts for this community today as well. Thank you. Have a good day too, Nemo. I did the same. Of course, not everyone in this town is seeing me for the first time, and many are familiar enough with my existence not to bother me. But, angel, please hold my hand. Mine too. Please. Could you name my daughter? Nameless One. There's a passage in the Bible I don't understand. Nameless One. Could you join our prayer meeting? Nameless One. The problem is that at least thousands of immigrants arrive each year. In other words, I have to live with thousands of people who believe I'm an angel, not an exaggeration. Their passion is incomparable to even the most devoted fans of celebrities. This is the 17th century, an era dominated by religion. They see me as a real angel, and a real angel as a messenger of God must be superior to humans, moral, and generally excellent. While fans who follow 21st century celebrities might joke about things like, they don't even go to the bathroom, they just drink dew. These people will debate for 3 days and 3 nights about whether or not they actually believe such things. That's right. I have to stand before them. I have to show a path that leaves no room for doubt. Before them, I have to act as the perfect angel they envision in their minds. Nemo, please join our prayer meeting. I would prefer not to. Pardon. If I join directly, Wouldn't everyone just stare at my hands and mouth instead of reading the scriptures and refining their thoughts? That is not what I desire. You should worship the Lord in your heart, not follow someone else's words and writings. So I need to occasionally drop profound statements like these. My knee is scraped. Oh, are you all right? Let me apply some medicine. Angel. And I also need to periodically perform actions that could feature in heartwarming stories or propaganda. Sigh. It's incredibly busy. I wonder what fun politicians find in their previous lives, given how hard it is to maintain public opinion. Anyway, after breaking through the crowd and entering the Council of Six building, it all starts again. Nemo, you're here. Eleanor? Sorry, I'm a bit late. Vicente, how far has the meeting progressed? Haha, we've just started, so don't worry. A place with faces that have seen me for 20 years. A place with people who have become as familiar with me as possible. So while I don't need the showmanship from earlier, other efforts are still necessary. So, you're saying we need to greatly increase the Navy? They say Spanish ships are threatening our vessels now. What's urgent now is developing Florida. Investing resources in the Night Brigade is the wise choice. Let's take a vote. Those in favor of strengthening naval power, raise your hands. 3 people. Another 3-3 tie. 6 people. Of all numbers and even 1. Even if they handle everything else themselves, when votes split evenly like now, things become awkwardly problematic. At such times, who do people rely on? Then let's ask Nemo. Nemo, which side do you think is reasonable? Me, of course. There's a reason why I often attend a government created to avoid work. Since I serve as a kind of chairperson and 7th member in the Council of 6, it's difficult to stay away. Normally, I could just maintain posture throughout the meeting, nod appropriately with a "you're right" and "you're also right" expression, and that would be it. But things are different when there's a lot of work and opinions frequently diverge. Nemo? Why do important issues always roll to me? Yes. Between strengthening the Navy and expanding the Night Brigade, which do you see as more urgent? I pause and consider. What I worry about at times like this isn't anything else. It would be good if only important decision-making rights rolled to me. This community wouldn't stray too far from the direction I envision. But what if something goes wrong? I'm not superhuman, and I can make mistakes too, right? What if something seriously goes wrong after following my words? Then trust in me would collapse. So the method I chose was this. Both seem important. The Toyotomi Hideyoshi strategy. But we have to choose one of the two. Both need iron and wood. Then, Vicente, let me ask again. What seems more urgent? The Night Brigade, I suppose, making the other person nervous by speaking meaningfully. And importantly, I shouldn't nod carelessly here. I merely smiled faintly, interlaced my fingers, and said to Vicente, I know your sailors have worked hard. Let's enhance their support. Nemo. But right now, we're deciding the community's affairs. So let's only think about what would be more beneficial for the community's prosperity. I understand. And finally, Vicente, what would you choose? I'll change my opinion to the Night Brigade. There. I didn't say anything. It was Vicente's decision. I just listened to Vicente's complaints. I hold no responsibility. Even if our naval power gets punctured, it's not my responsibility. Like this, I feel a bit of self-loathing and stress. I wonder if I really need to go this far. But well, what can I do? For now, if I want to survive, I need to minimize strongly pushing or opposing things unless they're important. It's really tiring. That day, I went back and played games all night. Chapter 270. Thoughts on the Future 1. The legitimate king of France and Navarre, who was destined to be assassinated in 1610, was still alive and breathing, rebuilding France and restoring royal authority much faster than in the original history. The starting point of this historical inflection was clear. Trade with the New World. The emergence of enormous rights held solely in the king's hands. Through this, Henri IV could wield vast monetary power, distribute privileges to his supporters, and manipulate public opinion to easily seize power. That was his good fortune. In 1610, a mad Catholic fanatic named François Ravaillac jumped into the king's carriage, but was easily subdued and executed. Now, his glorious reign was entering its 25th year. In the court of such Henri IV, there was one person who made everyone sink into tense silence. The conductor who held the kingdom's finances in one hand, Maximilien de Bethune, who became the Duke of Sully, and the king's favorite Hercule de Rohan, Duke of Montbazon, and even Henri IV himself were watching that one person with sweaty palms. There was also a nickname secretly given to him. It has been a long time since I saw you. The mouth of hell, la bouche de l'enfer. Oitoten. In the tense atmosphere, Henri IV tried to smile and extended both arms to welcome Oitoten. No, why do they always send the same person as an envoy? What did this man do so well for the emperor to secure such an important position? Even the titles and positions the chamberlain had just announced for him were extraordinary. Chief of the Chesapeake tribe, Knight Commander of Agriculture, member of the Council of Six. I understand what a chief is, and I understand that the Council of Six is the head of government after explanation, but why is the name of the Knight Order like that? Agricultural Knight Brigade? Do they farm? Henri IV briefly imagined knights sweating profusely while scything in a wheat field, then blinked away the idle thought. Anyway, this time, I need to figure out what he's trying to do. Port of Trade want to increase. That's all. Despite not having seen him for years, Oitoten still spoke in rough English and nodded as if to say, "You understand, right?" He seemed to have no intention of improving his English or French conversation skills. It's embarrassing how brazenly he assumes others will understand him. Anyway, Henri IV couldn't help but feel his lips curling up after hearing what Oitoten had said. Oitoten had his tribesmen spread out a map of North America for everyone to see, then marked a point in the middle. One in the land of the Wabanaki Confederacy. It's much farther north than the existing Virginia ports of trade. Then another marked point, and one in the Florida Archbishopric. Florida? Did you just say Florida? Henri IV blinked for a moment, wondering if he had misheard. But upon checking, his thoughts were correct. Is that where the slave revolt occurred? Wrong. Not slave revolt, but slave uprising. Oitoten snorted at Henri IV's words and answered with pride. I led the Knight Brigade, helped the uprising. The implication of Oitoten's words was clear. They were behind the rebellion that had stirred the viceroyalty of New Spain, and they had defeated the suppression forces sent directly by the Spanish Empire and finally conquered the place. As that fact became certain, the king's court fell silent. From those who claimed the emperor's existence was false, to those who said that empire did exist but was ultimately a dependency of England or just a small village. Even those who already believed in the existence of an emperor and empire in the New World. Everyone shut their mouths. None of them had assumed the existence of an empire capable of facing Spain. But they not only faced them in battle but won and even conquered their lands. A sense of awe briefly flickered in their eyes as they looked at Oitoten. While Oitoten enjoyed that gaze and slightly raised his chin, Henri IV spoke. Anyway, I understand. Your lord has come here to open new ports of trade? What compensation do you desire? None. What? We just came here to announce two facts. One is that we're establishing new ports of trade, Oitoten said, raising two fingers. And the other is that we're inheriting the previous treaty. Inheriting? Yes, not in the name of Virginia, but in the name of the Union. The Union? Today is full of things I don't understand. Tell me, what is the Union? As Oitoten clapped his hands, his tribesmen took out prepared papers and brought them before Henri IV. When the chamberlains received and unfolded them before Henri IV, a treaty document appeared. Same content as before, except that ports of trade increased to 3. Henri IV, reading through the familiar treaty clauses, suddenly returned to the very first sentence. And there he saw an unfamiliar phrase. For the promotion of mutual peace and justice, the Kingdom of France and the Continental Covenant, before the name of the Lord. Continental Covenant? Is this your new national name? Those who rule the continent have united through a covenant. Henri IV quickly calculates in his mind. So that's why there's no compensation for the ports. They are a federal state united by a covenant. The Wabanaki Confederacy and Florida Archbishopric mentioned earlier must both be member states under them. That's why they need to inherit the treaty. Because now the contracting party is not Virginia, but that Continental Covenant. And that's why they're opening ports without any compensation, because those new member states requested the emperor to open ports. Henri IV, having quickly deduced the situation in the New World from the few words Oytoten had dropped, smiled and guided him to the banquet. The atmosphere of the banquet was excellent due to the unexpected gift. And Henri IV was also immersed in happy anticipation. A gift without compensation. Well, I've gained profit without doing anything. Then to whom should I distribute the royal licenses for the new ports of trade? Slurp, slurp. Gulp, gulp. Ah, the vanilla scent is indeed strong. Chapter 271. Thoughts on the Future, 2. That was until Oytoten suddenly took something out and drank it. His expression, his posture, everything about him always attracted the attention of those gathered here. And this time was no exception. No, I should correct myself. Oh, Sir Oytoten? What is it? Could I possibly know the name of the beverage you're drinking? You mentioned a vanilla scent. What? This you mean? French people don't know. His expression, his posture, everything was optimized to draw human attention. This is whiskey. Only then did Henri de Bourbon, the King of France and Navarre, realize. Whiskey? Could I just have a sip? Hack, cough. It's extremely strong. Strong, but has a subtle flavor? It really does have a vanilla scent. A cherry flavor comes up at the end. He said that he wanted to commemorate the friendship with France. So, the name of this whiskey is bourbon, pronounced in English as bobbin. See, could I also have a sip, please? Could I also request a glass? Now Henri knew why the emperor had sent that man again. Henri has his dignity too. He couldn't help but buy a lot of liquor named after himself. And after Oytoten left, the royal banquet wine bourbon began selling like hotcakes. A gift without compensation, my ass. Equals. The Night Brigade under Oytoten's jurisdiction. The Navy commanded by Vicente. The Virginia Trading Company managed by Raleigh. What to do with these now? The Night Brigade, in terms of a modern government, is like the Department of Agriculture plus Army. The Navy is responsible for coastal defense and maintaining the multi-level system. And the Virginia Trading Company handles trade with England and Scotland, distributing trade profits to people, so it's like the Department of Commerce and Welfare, and at the same time recruiting people from England and Scotland, so it could be called the Department of Immigration. That's right. We didn't set up a government first and then create government departments. Rather, each department emerged separately, played separately, and only now has a government been formed. In modern terms, it's like the Department of Agriculture, the military, and the Department of Health grew separately and then later assembled like a transforming robot bang to give birth to the government. Moreover, in the case of the Night Brigade, it was originally just an agricultural equipment nightclub that grew robustly into such a form, which would seem even more bizarre to modern people. Anyway, since it wasn't a government form that was systematically crafted from start to finish, there were many difficulties. For example, there's this problem. So from now on, the Continental Assembly has to take over the Night Brigade, Medical Institute, Navy, Virginia Trading Company, and so on. That's right. How? Exactly. That's something we'll have to figure out going forward. At my words, Manteo, who had just been elected as Virginia's representative to the Continental Assembly, grimaced like a aughts variety show participant who had just downed a shot of fish sauce. Anyway, on the day the Continental Assembly was first convened, civil servants, including the Night Brigade, gathered to swear allegiance to the Union government, and the scene was quite magnificent. But the emotion ended there. Manteo soon became so busy he could barely breathe, and the newly established Continental Assembly also immediately collapsed from excessive work. Of course, so did I. Thus, the first amended clause in the Continental Covenant was, all countries under the effect of this covenant send a representative with a 4-year term to form the Continental Assembly, and through this create common laws and mediate conflicts. From 1 representative to 3 representatives. When the number of representatives went from 5 to 15, the work backlog was somewhat relieved. Anyway, the task of building a country from scratch cannot be simple. There are plenty of trial and errors in everything. I sighed and thought as I trudged out. At least, this was wrapped up today. A central government has just been created. Until now, I honestly didn't feel like I was ruling a country. At most, it felt like being a local strongman in a small city of tens of thousands. But now it was different. My influence now directly reached regions I had only indirectly contacted through the multi-level trade network. I had taken control of Eastern North America. In an instant, I had established a country several times the size of the Korean peninsula. Realizing this fact, my mind went blank for a moment, then came back. Ha! Ha ha! Is this the opportunity that America had in the original history? Not many enemies around, the sea right next to it, and fertile land. These are the conditions that could be called the cradle of a superpower. Perhaps we could go even further than America. We started earlier, have more advanced technology, and stronger leadership. Instead of being at odds with the natives, we've drawn them into our sphere, and we've eradicated French or other powers' colonization of North America from the outset. As I thought that far, I felt the thoughts I had only held privately in my mind suddenly growing. Something is really happening. I've been running for my own survival for too long. Thinking that the natives or English colonists might threaten my survival, I climbed onto the ridiculous misconception of being an angel or whatever. The community that started from there has now become a great nation encompassing hundreds of thousands of people, and it looks like it will continue to grow. What lies at the end of that? To be honest, I have no idea. The life plans of ordinary humans rarely extend beyond 80 years at most. How much more would a perspective and plan for my eternal life match up? Without realizing it, I stopped walking and looked at the sky. If the population of this country increases not just to hundreds of thousands but to millions or tens of millions, if the multi-level trade network reaches California and the Arctic, and all the people living there are incorporated as member states of our covenant, what will this country look like then? No, what will the world look like? Only now am I beginning to realize it. I feel it more deeply in this moment than when I heard that the history of England, France, and Spain, places I couldn't even visit, had been twisted. I am changing history. And the next day I heard one piece of news. Queen Elizabeth disappeared. Yes, suddenly, leaving just a letter. Slide. I'm bored, so I'm going out. Where to? I'm going to Ireland. It will be helpful to you too. All my emotions from yesterday just died. Chapter 272. To Ireland, 1. Your Majesty? Are you all right? You need to disembark from the ship now. Of course, I'm perfectly fine. Do I not look well to you? I'm only joking. Ah ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. I most enjoy watching you force that awkward laugh while trying to read my mood. What an utterly unpleasant personality this person had. Margaret tried not to voice that thought aloud and only scurried about more nervously, while Elizabeth, seeing right through her, laughed again. Your Majesty, indeed, Miss Lawrence speaks truly. Please preserve your physical health. Health? Where would you find a healthy 80-year-old in the first place? I'm hardly Methuselah. After snapping at her favorite Robert Cecil, Elizabeth asked him again. Rather than that, focus on other matters. Is the news you've brought from Ireland accurate? Of course. How could information collected while traveling constantly between the old world and the new world be incorrect? The Queen nodded at Robert Cecil's words and began to solidify the thoughts she had been contemplating. Then she said to Cecil, "What do you think of my plan?" "Well, if you don't have an opinion so excellent that it renders you speechless, answer me at once." "May I speak honestly?" "Of course. From the Kingdom of England's perspective, this is madness. Furthermore, there's a risk of losing the support of domestic Protestants. That's because you need to be mindful of James after I'm gone. Let me ask again, from my perspective, how is it?" When the Queen asked, Robert Cecil lowered his head with an almost deathly expression. More than anything else, the Queen was worst of all, doing this while knowing full well. As the Queen said, it was strange that she hadn't died yet at her age, while James was still in his prime. This meant he needed to prepare for the time after this ambiguous era of joint monarchs ended. For the time when that Scottish king would become the sole monarch of the entire British Isles. "Ah, Your Majesty. From Your Majesty's perspective. If he uttered one more word here, he would become an accomplice, a participant in this plan to thwart James. Spit it out. From Your Majesty's perspective." Damn it. The Queen was frightening. Those vibrant eyes, unlike those of an octogenarian, pierced Robert Cecil. Cecil ultimately had no choice but to spit it out as the Queen commanded. "It's a formidable gamble. There are many risks to bear. There's great danger of tarnishing Your Majesty's reputation and authority. On the other hand, if you avoid these dangers, Your Majesty stands to lose nothing. It's also a key to stabilizing the current political situation. It will help the the Continental Covenant as well. Above all, the Spaniards. Yes, the Spaniards. Their great army would be dancing to the Queen's tongue." Robert Cecil felt goosebumps rise on his arms as he contemplated this fact. A cold shiver ran down his spine despite the warm sea air, and he found himself gripping his hands tightly behind his back to hide their trembling. The sheer audacity of her plan left him breathless with both admiration and terror. The current Queen would go this far to destroy her enemies. Even devising such an absurd scheme and possessing the deranged personality to realize it. Her mind, sharp as a Toledo blade despite her advanced years, had crafted a strategy so cunning that Cecil himself could scarcely believe its boldness. She had always been formidable, but this was beyond even what he had thought her capable of. Indeed, one should never antagonize the Queen, even in her final moments. She would find a way to destroy her enemies by any means necessary. Cecil had seen lesser men crushed beneath her calculating gaze, their fortunes and reputations shattered with mere words. Age had not dampened her ruthlessness. If anything, the approaching shadow of death had only heightened her determination to settle all scores before departing this mortal realm. Robert Cecil thought this as he bowed his head, swallowing hard against the knot of anxiety in his throat. And soon they disembarked from the ship and set foot on Ulster land occupied by English forces. The wooden gangplank creaked beneath their weight, still slick with sea spray that glittered in the weak Irish sunlight. Her subjects, who hadn't even received prior notice that the Queen would come, suddenly gathered around upon seeing the splendidly dressed lady. They emerged from hovels and market stalls, abandoning their meager tasks to catch a glimpse of their sovereign. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "The Queen! It's truly her!" As they pressed forward, their gaunt faces transformed by wonder. This was how rulers of the 17th century presented themselves. In this dirty, shabby gray world, they shone like the sun, emitting clean fragrance and vibrant colors. The Queen shone in this manner, among the people impoverished by the long war. Soon, an attendant announced that Her Majesty Elizabeth, rightful Queen of England, Scotland, Ireland, and France, had arrived. The subjects cheered, and field commanders and mayors came running to bow before the Queen. Only then did Elizabeth leave the clamorous dockside and head toward the official residence. The path to the official residence was terribly bleak. After several famines in succession and a war that had been shaking the entire island for 20 years, the standard of living here had already hit rock bottom. "Your Majesty, this is the second time you've honored us with your presence. Last time, you showed your mercy with food for your starving subjects. That's enough pleasantries. I have a request to make. At Elizabeth's words, the field commander and mayor of all Ireland looked up in surprise. Why had the renowned queen come here without prior notice? And why was she pressing them like this? As they wondered, they soon heard the queen's answer and could not close their mouths. I propose a meeting with Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, Commander-in-Chief of the Irish Catholic Army. I wish to see the leader of the Irish forces. In person. == What? How frightening. Why is she suddenly going to Ireland alone? Isn't that a war zone? Walter, did the Queen of England perhaps give you any hint? None whatsoever. Chapter 273. To Ireland. 2. Raleigh could only shake his head. No, that's impossible. No matter how eccentric and peculiar the Queen might be, she's not an unreasonable person. Rather, she appears eccentric and peculiar precisely because she thinks and acts so thoroughly strategically. That was the Queen I knew. But if such a queen acted this way, there must be a reason somewhere. Ah! Come to think of it, she did say something rather meaningful. Something meaningful? Yes, roughly these words. Ahem. I must go to keep my promise with the angel, she said. Promise? What promise? I don't recall making any promise with the Queen. I pondered for a moment and then shook my head. I have no idea. Still incomprehensible. Raleigh tilted his head in confusion just like me. Well, anyway, dwelling on an unsolvable problem is a waste of time. I decided to ask about other important matters first. So, what's the situation in Ireland? I needed to know how the situation in Ireland was unfolding that made the Queen decide to go there. The answer might lie there. It's fair to say that about 80 to 90% of Ireland is under the control of the Catholic coalition forces. Is that not it? The English army has suffered repeated defeats at the hands of the Irish coalition, and Hugh O'Neill, that is, their commander-in-chief Eogan Mór O'Neill, has built his authority through an undefeated streak. However, due to Ireland's decentralized nature, other lords are keeping him in check, and amid this, several famines have coincided, creating a volatile public sentiment. I see. The withdrawal of many Spanish troops, who were acting as a balancing force between them, is accelerating the division among the Irish forces. The English army attempted a counterattack targeting this division, but unfortunately was defeated again. So in summary, the English side keeps losing and losing, with no hope in sight? Yes, but the Irish forces, despite gaining the upper hand, are divided? Correct. And the Spanish forces supporting the Irish returned after being thoroughly defeated in Florida? That's right. What a mess. Wow, I understand even less now. The English forces are too busy everywhere to do anything effectively, and at the same time, the Irish forces are too busy fighting amongst themselves to consolidate their victory after driving out the English army. In that situation, the Spanish forces simply deserted to Florida and got crushed. A battlefield where everyone is miserable. I don't understand what she intends to do by going to such a chaotic place. Boost morale? She wouldn't cross the Atlantic at the age of 80 just for that, would she? After deep contemplation by both Raleigh and myself, about a month or two passed. A letter from the Queen was delivered via the clipper that traveled between England and Virginia. Operation successful. Returning soon. Below this brief note, the detailed circumstances were written, and I couldn't help but be astonished. What did you say? The Irish commander Eogan Mór O'Neill could not believe what the Queen had just said. At first, when he heard that the Queen was personally proposing a summit meeting, he couldn't contain his joy. The Queen, who had been staying across the Atlantic, was coming in person. If their victory wasn't on the threshold, why would she move her heavy feet and come all the way here to beg for a meeting? Yes, they too must have reached the point where they could no longer endure this war. Now, true freedom of faith and the restoration of Irish sovereignty were within reach. The long history of humiliation and oppression was finally coming to an end. With these thoughts, the Earl of Tyrone, O'Neill, led his most elite guard unit to the midpoint where they were confronting the English army. They stood there as proud victors, firmly believing this would be the signing ceremony for England's humiliating surrender document. But you heard correctly. Ah, no, I don't think I heard properly, Your Majesty, Queen of England. Could you please say it once more? What is this situation? O'Neill was not the only one flustered and agitated. Robert Cecil, who had followed all the way to this place, trembled, not knowing how to handle the aftermath, and Margaret, who was watching the meeting scene right next to him, was also in shock, thinking, Why am I in such a place? The Irish soldiers brought by O'Neill and the English soldiers brought by the Queen were also wide-eyed and stirring. The sound of their stirring quickly made this place as noisy as a marketplace. Just as you heard. And the Queen, regardless of the surrounding gazes, opened her mouth again. Let's end the war. Up to that point, O'Neill had anticipated it. Hadn't he expected this place to be where England would essentially declare surrender? But now you shall be King of Ireland. What? You will ascend as joint monarch with me and James. What? This is different from what was expected. What is this person babbling about? Is what I heard really what I heard? Congratulations. In an instant, O'Neill's mind was turned upside down. She did it all. What? Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth proceeded to Ireland and pushed for reconciliation. The price was the joint throne of Ireland. That can't be. Damn it all. That cursed which has sold off the throne again. How many pieces does she intend to cut this country into? I'll chew on her entrails. Cough hack. Your Majesty? Quickly. Your Majesty. Call the physicians at once. Similarly, James of Scotland, upon hearing the news, fainted. Then, our army remaining in Ireland? Communication has been cut off. You're telling me that 3,000 elite troops have simply lost contact? Are you serious? Soon after, the Spanish court was also thrown into turmoil. Spain suffered a great defeat in Ireland and retreated? Stadthouder. For our republic, this is an opportunity we must seize. Since Habsburg influence is weakening, I beseech you to consider supporting the Protestant princes. Send a letter to the Elector Palatine. France will also move to support him. The Netherlands, the Palatinate, France, and Protestant countries began to move. Almost every country that heard the news took action. Chapter 274. The Elector 1. You must not accept their proposal, Count. With just a little more effort, we can end the war. No. This is the opportunity to end the war. Looking at the conditions, we've essentially won, haven't we? Such autonomy and religious freedom. Almost all the conditions we wanted have been achieved. A heated debate was unfolding before the Earl of Tyrone, O'Neill. Some insisted they should hold out until complete independence was achieved. Others claimed that accepting the proposal itself was equivalent to achieving complete independence and their goals. And the Earl of Tyrone's own thoughts. This is an absurd proposal. That's what they were. It was an absurd proposal. From the moment he accepted this proposal, some nobles would accuse him of being a traitor who betrayed Ireland to England and caused trouble. Despite the fact that no one had fought against England more vigorously than he had. At the same time, Spain might label him a Catholic traitor who abandoned his alliance and faith by submitting to a heretic which, despite his achievement of religious freedom, simply because he withdrew from the war. No one could predict what would unfold afterward. That was the trap laid within that proposal. Even the Queen herself, who had laid the trap, couldn't predict the outcome. He would walk a thorny path. The crown he would wear after accepting that proposal would be made not of gold, but of thorns. But the Earl of Tyrone O'Neill returned to the meeting place in the neutral zone the next day. After politely escorting Elizabeth outside the meeting hall, he said, 20 years, Your Majesty. For 20 years, throughout this land of Ireland, the soil has absorbed the blood of countless free people, and using that as fertilizer, death has bloomed disgusting flowers everywhere. As he spoke, the Earl of Tyrone O'Neill pointed to a corner of the seemingly empty neutral zone. I cannot remember how many battles were fought here, but one thing is certain. In that corner, the remains of burned-down houses were visible. People once lived here too. Where have they gone? They are probably dead. This is the result of English oppression. So, because you cannot forget that resentment, you desire complete independence. The Earl of Tyrone O'Neill shook his head. I value the blood yet to be spilled more than the blood already shed. At O'Neill's words, the Queen appropriately remained silent. O'Neill's fist trembled slightly, and his voice carried a metallic edge. But I cannot let the blood already shed be forgotten. So, in exchange for accepting the treaty, promise me one thing. Speak. You killed them. O'Neill looked up at the sky with reddened eyes. The bright morning sun floating in the dawn air met his gaze. Do not forget the many souls you have killed. This peace is not your mercy. This is our victory, gained at the cost of much blood. I don't care how much you and King James check each other. Nor does it matter to us how you intend to defeat Spain. You came forward like this with your own purposes in mind, but that doesn't matter. We have paid the price with our blood and in return gained freedom. Do not forget them. For a military commander, these were quite sentimental words. But O'Neill couldn't help being sentimental in this moment. Looking back, he saw the Queen open her mouth with a bitter smile. A struggle that had lasted 20 years was here, I understand, coming to an end. Ireland had finally gained freedom. Soon, news of the agreement spread throughout Ireland. The Irish weren't confused by the strange situation of suddenly serving 3 monarchs simultaneously. They quickly understood. Despite having to serve Elizabeth as queen again, there was surprisingly little psychological resistance, partly due to the relief efforts of the past. At the same time, it was also due to resentment toward foreign armies that had continued local requisitioning during the prolonged war. Spanish forces suddenly found themselves chased by attacks from the Irish coalition forces who had instantly changed from allies to enemies, as well as by raids and looting from the populace everywhere. Spanish ships docked in Irish ports were immediately treated as ownerless vessels and seized. Spain had no choice but to withdraw from Ireland, suffering enormous losses. All of Europe watched Spain's defeat, and all of Europe was shaken to varying degrees by that defeat. Finally! For instance, here was Elector Palatine Friedrich, reacting in such a manner. You say Spanish forces are retreating from Ireland after a major defeat? My father-in-law is winning. Shoo, my father doesn't like it. The woman, the Queen of England, decided this unilaterally. Wasn't Ireland almost a lost territory anyway? If the Queen handled it on his behalf, shouldn't he be grateful? Friedrich exclaimed with joy after hearing the news from his wife, Elizabeth Stuart. Of course, his father-in-law, James of Scotland, was actually grinding his teeth over Elizabeth arbitrarily dividing and selling off the Irish throne. But that wasn't his concern. It wasn't as if he would inherit the Irish throne. What mattered to Friedrich was the news itself that Spanish forces were fleeing Ireland with their tails between their legs. Friedrich von der Pfalz was one of the 7 electors who held the right to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. As a Calvinist believer, he had come to represent the position of Calvinists within the empire, and was also a spirited young man in his late teens. Just last year, in 1613, he had married the Scottish Princess Elizabeth, and neither knew much about the affairs of the British Isles, nor felt the need to know. Look, my dear wife, aren't the Spanish Catholics finally fleeing from my father-in-law's territory like cowards? Isn't that what matters? The Habsburg forces, the Catholic forces, had been defeated once again. The Emperor of the New World had stranded them once, and England, ruled by his father-in-law, had shattered their ambitions once more. It would likely take them a long time to recover their strength and raise funds again. If you asked Kin Issei about him, he might respond, Friedrich, what? Oh, was he in the catalogue? But in truth, he was someone who had greatly benefited from Virginia's birth. Chapter 275. The Elector, 2. Spain suffered repeated defeats at the hands of England, which received help from Virginia, and Henry IV of France, who received financial support from Virginia, pushed out the pro-Spanish faction within France. As Spain's burden of war costs increased and room for maneuver narrowed, they entered into armistice negotiations with the Netherlands despite the war with England not having ended. England and France were rising while Spain was declining compared to the original history. In such circumstances, Friedrich, a fellow Calvinist believer, had become linked by blood to James, King of England and Scotland, and received tangible and intangible support from his father-in-law. Henry IV of France also had established himself near Friedrich's territory and supported him in various ways, as Friedrich had received a French education in his youth, mainly in the form of providing luxury goods from Virginia at low prices. He sold these luxury goods at high prices to surrounding lords, making a profit and growing his funds. Additionally, the wealthy Netherlands, also believing in Calvinism, sponsored him as a nearby Protestant great lord. And with those funds, he indulged in massive luxury and further expanded his influence. He felt nothing but confidence now, this strange feeling that the world was moving for him. He was intoxicated by the feeling that fate was twisting itself to help him. And that was actually true. If we ever build our power, even the Habsburgs won't dare to ignore us. Please be careful with your words. Wife, what do we have to fear? Fate is helping us. Of course, I'll be careful outside. I'm only like this at home. But of course that wasn't true. The young lord, practically still a boy, couldn't possibly contain his overflowing confidence outside. His luxury, his showing off, his actions caught the eye of the newly enthroned Emperor Matthias, but, being initially favorable toward Protestants with Bohemian support, he left the young elector alone, concerned that keeping him in check might be seen as general oppression of Protestants. However, if another emperor ascended, the situation could change. And Matthias was old. His death was not far off. Nor was the day the emperor would change. Nor the day this time bomb would explode. In France, Henry IV seems to be holding up the recent treaty in Ireland as a kind of model case. Something like, excellently preserving religious freedom and the peace of the kingdom. Or so. I nodded at Raleigh's report. I had a general understanding of how Europe had been turned upside down. Especially the British Isles, which were not merely turned upside down but boiling with events from all sides, though it was no longer my concern. Thank you, Walter. You may go back now. Yes, Her Majesty probably isn't in good condition. That's only natural. Even in the 21st century, an 80-year-old traveling abroad would accumulate fatigue, and in those days, overseas travel meant stuffing oneself between wooden planks for months. There's no way her body could be fine. But still, despite just returning from travel and being exhausted, she called for me. She even said she wanted a private audience. Then I have no choice but to respect the Queen's will. This is Roanoke Island, the Queen's mansion. Needless to say, without proper infrastructure across the Atlantic, a grand palace couldn't be built, so it was merely a rather large wooden mansion. Quite modest for a monarch to live in. At my words, Raleigh bowed and stepped back. I knocked on the door, and a servant came out to open it and guided me inside. After passing through a not-so-long corridor, I opened the innermost room door and entered. You've come. The Queen was there, lying in bed. I had to maintain my composure and focus my eyes, trying not to show my surprise. The Queen's gaze was not that of the energetic monarch I had known. It was listless, an adjective that didn't suit her, but now things were different. It seemed like she had become a different person in just a few months. As I pulled out a chair and sat down, Margaret, who had been nursing the Queen, gave me a nod and stepped outside. As the door closed, it was just the two of us. It's been a while. I greeted her, and she raised her upper body, putting strength into her drowsy eyes. That made her look somewhat closer to her former state. The Queen raised her hand to point somewhere, and there was a freshly brewed cup of coffee. It was for me. I took a sip and said to the Queen, "Why did you do it?" It was a sentence without a subject or object, but she seemed to understand what I meant to say. Now it was time to hear her answer. I already told you. I did it because I was bored. She moved her dry lips as if a fish were gaping. As I opened my mouth to ask if that wasn't all, her words quickly continued. Being bored means having nothing to do. With this old body, I can no longer play bowls, and I thought hunting or fishing would be too difficult. So I did it. I see. I understand roughly. I'm starting to understand why the Queen did what she did. I'm getting the sense of it. Still, I wanted to hear the answer directly from her lips. So I asked, what exactly was that promise? As Raleigh had said, before the Queen departed, she had said something like, I must go to keep my promise with the angel. Upon hearing this, a spark flashed momentarily in the Queen's eyes. As if strength had returned to her body, she straightened up from leaning against the headboard and said, Ah, finally that question comes. The Queen smiled and stared directly at me. I met the spark that had risen in her eyes. She had always moved full of will and desire for life, and it was like a flame. And that flame was gradually, it's very enjoyable. Conversing with you is always enjoyable. Dying out. It was the natural fate for an 80-year-old. Elizabeth's fate was approaching her. Most naturally, she was dying. Chapter 276. Eternal Rest, 1. She was dying. It was a natural thing. Not because of any special illness or threat, but simply because the human body, not designed to live forever, was slowly coming to a halt. Nevertheless, this realization was shocking to me. Somehow, the Queen always seemed to radiate a heat that resisted death. Because of this, even knowing it was impossible, I had been under the illusion that the Queen would live forever. You're acting as if you're seeing an old person for the first time, even though you've already seen several people depart. And such inner thoughts of mine were clearly exposed to the Queen. The Queen smiled and said, Let me answer again. Your question about why I did it, as there are other things to address. She pulled back her covers and moved her skinny legs to sit on the edge of the bed. Crossing her legs, she wrapped herself in dignity like armor, as if she had never been lying down like a patient. First of all, I wanted to crush my enemies. Ahem. It seems my words lacked dignity. I apologize. Let me correct myself. I wanted to defeat my enemies, trample them, and watch them crumble. It's not that I particularly hated them. I just found it terrible that they targeted what was mine, my possessions, my power, and furthermore, me. So I couldn't leave my enemies alone. With a body that's about to die, you think such thoughts? I inwardly stuck out my tongue. I wanted to applaud her. It felt like reading one of those satisfying revenge stories that circulate on Twitter. Like watching the madness of someone who formats their work computer's files and takes off when retiring. Wow, she's actually doing it. Exactly that feeling. If you replace retirement with farewell to life, it would be a perfect analogy. Her determination to feed her enemies one last bitter pill before departing was not just surprising but brilliant. She herself seemed quite pleased with her answer and smiled contentedly as she spoke. And it seems to have succeeded. James won't be able to touch Ireland as he must guarantee its autonomy, and Spain has also suffered enormous losses. Good news for the Continental Covenant as well. I harmed my enemies and helped my allies. What could be better than that? Is that so? No, that's not it. Of course, crushing enemies and helping allies is the basis of all politics. But there's something more important than that. Your health has deteriorated. Surviving is the basis of all human beings. And she is Elizabeth Tudor, a person full of the will to survive somehow, who hates nothing more than harming her own body. Ha! This old body won't get much worse from a little movement anyway. It was strange to hear such words from her lips. The Queen wasn't that kind of person. At least that's what I knew, what I had known. What did that promise mean? I had to ask, and she answered, I must have told you through Margaret before. She grinned like a mischievous child. That I would repent before dying. Look. She raised her now skinny arms to show me. This is the body of someone about to die. So I tried to do some good before dying. So I ended the war. It must have been a miserable war. The war in Ireland, which would have been called the 9 Years' War in the distant future, had now become the 20 Years' War. Their commander-in-chief, no, the one who has now become the King of Ireland, told me to remember those I killed. So I said I would. I decided to remember the fact that I have killed so many. I have lived shedding so much blood, Elizabeth said, widening her eyes. I did it because I wanted to live. No, I did it because I didn't want to die. As more blood stained my hands, death became more terrifying. I wasn't attached to life. I was avoiding death. The blood vessels in her eyes became prominent. Her fists clenched tight. I'm still afraid of dying. Afraid of going to hell. I don't want to go to hell. The thought of eternal flames engulfing me makes it impossible to sleep. Is that so? It is. So tell me, nameless one. She stared directly at me. She raised her hand to grasp my arm. Can I be saved? She maintained her mischievous smile while widening her eyes and holding my arm. The strength with which she held my arm was so weak. But I knew it was all the strength she could muster. She asked again, "Will I go to heaven?" I stood there wondering what to tell her, and I told the truth. I don't know. Only God knows. So don't worry about it. The Queen smiled at my words. That's the answer I wanted. And she lay back down on the bed as if collapsing. Her face looked more peaceful, and her eyes were closing as if drowsiness was overwhelming her. We were silent for a moment. Going to Ireland, stopping the war there. She spoke as if talking in her sleep. Because of that, I don't think I can go to heaven. It's ridiculous to believe that my misdeeds would be cleared just because I stopped a war that I started. Then why did you do it? The Queen covered her eyes and spoke again. It bothered me. Shouldn't one be free of bothers at the end of life? I see. But wouldn't staying here also bother you? This isn't your homeland, is it?
No.
Her tone suddenly became clear. The place where one feels comfort is homeland. Thank you for making me comfortable. With those words, she fell asleep. I could hear her lightly snoring. I covered the Queen of England with a blanket and went outside. Margaret, who had been waiting, bowed her head and asked, "How is Her Majesty?" Her tone was worried. She wasn't asking about her physical condition. After all, she was a physician with experience. She seemed peaceful, dignified. At my answer, Margaret smiled with a sigh of relief. I greeted her and left the Queen's mansion. A week later, the Queen died. It was drizzling that day. The Queen's death meant the change of England's dynasty, from Tudor to Stuart. Now James became the sole monarch of Britain. Though in Ireland he was a joint monarch. And a change in dynasty meant a change in the responsible party. Chapter 277. Eternal Rest. 2. Elizabeth, in her twilight years, could pursue bold and sometimes reckless policies without concern for dynastic repercussions. She acted with the freedom of one who knew her lineage would end with her final breath. There would be no Tudor heirs to inherit the consequences of her actions, no Tudor children to face retribution for her choices. This liberation from dynastic responsibility had emboldened her to take risks that a younger monarch, or one with direct descendants, might have avoided. James, by contrast, had been stability-oriented throughout his reign in Scotland, cautious and deliberate in his decisions. His every action was made with the knowledge that his sons and their sons after them would inherit both his throne and the consequences of his governance. The Stuart line stretched before him like a chain of obligation, each link binding him to prudence. After holding a splendid funeral for his political rival, a ceremony of such grandeur that it nearly emptied the royal treasury, with black-draped processions winding through London streets and nobles from across Europe in attendance, James moved with remarkable swiftness. The body of Elizabeth had scarcely cooled when a messenger, riding day and night with fresh horses at every post, delivered news of the Queen's passing. This herald traveled the long and treacherous route from James's court in Glasgow to Madrid, where the Spanish king resided in his imposing Alcazar palace. Felipe III, the young Spanish monarch still living in the shadow of his formidable father Philip II, and his chief minister the Duke of Lerma, who had recently returned to Madrid from the new capital Valladolid, received the news through the messenger from Glasgow. The implications were immediately clear to both men as they exchanged knowing glances across the ornate council chamber. The chessboard of European politics had been upended with the removal of its most cunning queen. The responsible party for the war had changed. The Spanish immediately dispatched Duke of Frias, Juan Fernández de Velasco y Tovar, to Glasgow for peace negotiations. Spain recognizes that England is a Protestant country and shall not attempt to revive Roman Catholicism in England. Also, England shall cease all interference and obstruction of Spain's Atlantic navigation and colonial establishment, and open the English Channel. Ships of both countries may use each other's ports for repairs, refuge, and food supply. Fleets of fewer than 8 ships need no permission. Various provisions were added by the diplomatic envoys of both countries. From James's perspective, this war, sparked by Elizabeth's stubbornness, had brought only harm to his kingdom. It had not only ravaged Ireland but essentially turned it into an independent state. Not to mention the serious disruptions to maritime trade in the British Isles caused by the occupation of Ireland. Moreover, the endless amount of war expenses incurred from facing that great power couldn't be covered even with the vast treasures flowing in from Virginia. From Spain's perspective, continuing the conflict with England was not just unprofitable but harmful. The ceaseless piracy of the English was terrible, and resources that should have gone to more important conflicts were consumed here. Thus, the two kingdoms signed the Glasgow Treaty, putting an end to the long war. Ending the war like this, after winning so much, not receiving a penny in reparations makes no sense. And from there, the seeds of new conflict began to sprout. From the beginning, it was a treaty James made to focus on domestic politics and put an end to the war. The content of the treaty couldn't be favorable to England. James thought he could finally fully claim England. Now that the frustrating obstructor was gone, he believed he could completely dominate the British Isles. And we cannot recognize such a treaty. This is humiliation. England was in turmoil. Right? This is absurd. Not even being able to punish Catholic traitors? How can this make sense? Ignoring the slave trade is the shame of a civilized nation. We haven't waged war for so long to achieve this immoral peace. The Protestants moved first. There was a man shouting loudly before them. That's right, Cromwell. Your words are true. We must protest loudly. This is tyranny. Robert Cromwell. He stood with his young son, Oliver Cromwell, beside him and said, "We want our children to live in a pious and holy England, not in a land full of dishonor, immorality, and tyranny. Whoa! We will protest. We will firmly demand our rights from King James." They, the Liverpool faction that Elizabeth had joined hands with and recognized, resolved to disobey James. On the other hand, we Catholics have been defeated, that mad witch is dead, but the Scottish bumpkin still reigns over us, trying to spread the wrong faith. We must rise up. Right, right. Someone was inciting the Catholics. They gathered gunpowder, people, and firearms. Using the brief peace, they organized conspiracies and retreated into the depths. They cheered. They cheered the name of the energetic agitator, Guy Fawkes. Though James sent envoys throughout England proclaiming his royal decree and demanding oaths of loyalty, none of them listened. The kingdoms that had been temporarily united when the Queen died were now dividing. But they dreamed of coming together again someday. As the Queen had proclaimed, someone would break these waves, someone would quell this storm. Someday these kingdoms would be one again under his feet. Until then, everyone waited, picking up and serving the seeds of ambition that the Queen had sown. Walter, what will you do with this mansion? At Nemo's words, Raleigh pondered for a moment, then gave a hearty laugh. This mansion? Did Her Majesty leave no specific will regarding it?
No.
This place is temporarily leased land from the Baron of Roanoke, so it's yours again. Walter, it's up to you. Walter Raleigh looked up at the mansion of his longtime lover and sovereign, and said, I will ensure that no one ever lives here again. And I will preserve it forever. Raleigh walked toward the terrace for a moment, then kissed the doorpost and said, Rest in peace. That was the end. Chapter 278. Steamboat 1. The Queen of England had died. I heard the funeral was magnificent, befitting a monarch of her stature and legacy. Countless people reportedly wore mourning clothes of deep midnight black, their faces solemn and drawn with grief as they followed the funeral procession that wound through Roanoke's cobblestone streets like a somber river. The colony fell silent that day, even the birds seeming to respect the gravity of the occasion with their unusual quiet. A wax figure recreating her appearance in life was placed atop the coffin, the artisan having captured with remarkable skill the proud tilt of her chin and the knowing gleam in her eyes. The figure wore her royal regalia, crown polished to a brilliant shine, ermine-trimmed cloak arranged just so, making it seem almost as if she were merely sleeping atop her final bed. Those who had cherished her in life shed bitter tears as they bade farewell on her final journey, many dropping to their knees as the procession passed by, whispering prayers or final words to their departed sovereign. Of course, Raleigh would have been among the most prominent mourners, his tall figure unmistakable in the front ranks, head held high despite the weight of his grief. But he didn't say he cried when he recounted the day to me later. His voice had faltered briefly when speaking of the moment the coffin was lowered into the earth, but he quickly recovered, clearing his throat. He seemed to think that displaying such raw emotion wouldn't be manly, though the redness around his eyes when he returned told a different story than his proud words. Since London had been abandoned, she couldn't be buried in Westminster Abbey where her ancestors rested, but that probably didn't matter. She had considered Roanoke her home after all. Elizabeth left behind many things. Having lived her entire life as queen of several countries, her legacy was bound to be substantial. First, according to her will, all her artworks, treasures, and other possessions went to her most favored Raleigh. Raleigh traveled to England to collect these heirlooms and filled the house where the Queen had lived, making the now uninhabited mansion in Roanoke quite busy for a while. He remembered his sovereign and lover in his own way. The Queen's fishing boat, cosmetics, and various trinkets were left to Margaret. Margaret wept profusely while handling the Queen's cosmetics, then put them in a jewelry box and treasured them. Since Francis Drake had just recently passed away, the various ships ordered at the Chesapeake shipyard on the Queen's behalf were transferred to his descendants. The rest, being what she owned as Queen of England and Ireland, would probably be divided among her successors as they saw fit. The Queen left you a great deal, I remarked, watching Raleigh instructing workers to carry the Queen's belongings. Raleigh shook his head. His response was unexpected.
No.
Collecting these trinkets is merely for my own satisfaction. Is that so? Yes, truly. Her Majesty, for me, for Sir Nemo, left behind greater things. Raleigh turned his eyes away from the workers busily unloading cargo and said to me, For all of us. Perhaps she did it to vex James one more time, but I don't think so. This is her expression of gratitude. Raleigh's words might be right. I considered what truly important legacies she had left us. Her Majesty expressed gratitude to Sir Nemo for making her life worthwhile and for making her death comfortable. To Sir Nemo and to this entire community. The things the Queen left behind for this entire community. Raleigh pulled out a document and waved it. Here, I will forward the contents of this treaty with her to King James. The content of the treaty document, which Elizabeth had me sign together with her a few days before her death, was simple. The ownership of various ironworks and shipyards owned by the Kingdom of England located in the New World shall be transferred to the Continental Covenant. She passed on to us the ironworks and shipyards she had established here. These were facilities built with manpower support and loans from England. Along with this, ownership of Roanoke and other matters were neatly settled. Iron is often called the rice of industry. It's used everywhere. And ships remain the transportation means handling most of the world's logistics until the distant future of the 21st century. The means to produce these two things became entirely ours. At last, I briefly skimmed the treaty document Raleigh handed me, nodded upon seeing Elizabeth's hastily scrawled name in one corner. Since she wasn't a particularly cherished person to me, I didn't feel the heartache Raleigh did. Instead, I felt grateful for her consideration. It was the Queen's final gift. With it, our small and fragile community could now accomplish what we hadn't been able to before. Monumental things. This is how Holy Land, Croton, and Chesapeake become connected. The Queen's legacy led us forward. Croton in the south and Chesapeake in the north are more than 180 kilometers apart in a straight line. Making a proper route would make it much longer. Therefore, connecting the two would inevitably be a major construction project spanning years. The most crucial point was that Croton was an island. The sea, an obstacle incomparable to forests, rivers, or marshlands, stood between them, in multiple layers at that. Fortunately, since Croton wasn't an isolated island but a barrier island, islands formed by deposits of sand and gravel lined up along the coastline, in Pamlico Sound, it was relatively easy to reach the mainland through other clustered islands nearby. Anyway, to overcome the obstacle of the sea, plans were soon drawn up and opinions gathered in Virginia. Detailed plans for building breakwaters, constructing bridges, and establishing roads on top. Among these, the highest priority was the various materials needed for constructing those breakwaters and bridges. Everyone agreed that iron was the most important material regardless of what was being done where. Even supplying tools for workers to use required iron. The ironworks had already undergone a couple of renovations. This was due to the surge in demand for both steel and wrought iron after innovating the tractor production process and dramatically increasing production numbers. By applying the reverberatory furnace method previously used for melting bronze to steelmaking through trial and error, iron production leapt forward. Since then, almost all blacksmiths at the Roanoke Island Ironworks had become proficient in either the reverberatory furnace method or crucible steelmaking. So all they needed to do was officially expand the scale. There were no small number of ironworkers among immigrants from England, where the political situation had become chaotic. Chapter 279. Steamboat. 2. Simultaneously, mine development needed to proceed. The iron mine in Roanoke was still maintaining good production. The problem now wasn't on the iron side. What about stone? Given the scale of either bridges or breakwaters, stone alone would be difficult. We'll need cement. Cement to be used in the construction of bridges and breakwaters. Fortunately, unlike what Kin Issei had thought, 17th century people were well aware of cement's existence. Since it had existed since ancient Roman times, they couldn't help but know about it. However, cement was mostly used as exterior material or architectural adhesive, and rarely used for actually constructing various facilities. Still, they did know that cement could be mixed with water and various aggregates to harden into concrete, and structures could be raised with it. They just lacked practical experience using it. So they immediately established a mine at a limestone deposit relatively close to Roanoke, as listed in the catalog. Coincidentally, mining was also quite popular these days, for the same reason cotton farming was popular, making it easy to find workers. And for efficiency, a cement factory began to be built nearby. Though know-how regarding cement manufacturing and usage hadn't accumulated yet, they decided to solve that gradually and moved on to the next problem. What is generally called cement is mainly limestone powder mixed with other minor ingredients and heated. In other words, whether for cement production or to handle the recently increased iron production, fuel for burning was needed. Fortunately, bituminous coal, suitable for fuel among coal types, was mined abundantly in the former Powhatan tribe's territory, so fuel wasn't a major concern. Another mine was established, and a miners' monastery was also built nearby. However, since it was located inland, transportation difficulties were anticipated. Fortunately, following the James River leads directly to the coal deposits, so we're at ease. But going upstream won't be easy, so I'd like to find a method for that. Nameless one? Did you say a method? Yes. Besides, hasn't the phosphate rock mine in the south been greatly expanded recently? I understand they use river transport too, so the same problem arises. Isn't that unavoidable? It's still better than moving everything by land.
No.
There is a method. Qin Issei told his administrative staff. Let's make boats that don't need rowing or wind power. Everyone asked how that was possible. Qin Issei answered without difficulty. Haven't we already made carts that aren't pulled by oxen or horses? Steam tractors. Then, using the same principle, boats can move too. Steamboats. Equals. Steam engines and steamboats in the 17th century. Even saying it myself, it feels somewhat unreal. Well, without the 21st century materials and technology supporting us in the beginning, we would have only made toy-level items. Anyway, in some fields, our technology had reached 18th or 19th century levels. It was certainly something to be happy about. The first thing made with a steam engine was a simple water pump. It was used for reclaiming wetlands. After that, we made tractors right away. We modified them to use as tanks. It seems like we skipped tremendously important intermediate steps, but it was a challenge that would have been impossible without my basic knowledge of 21st century educational comics and agricultural machinery. Anyway, for us who didn't just make steam engines but developed tractors too, putting engines on boats to make them paddle themselves wouldn't be difficult. According to the educational comics I read, the first steamboat was developed in 1807, the early 19th century, meaning we only needed to be about 200 years ahead. Of course, the first tractor came out in 1856. Entirely possible. Certainly, it was worrisome that, unlike agricultural tools, I was completely ignorant about ships. But with the skilled shipwrights who had worked together on clippers, they could correct my minor errors. Ships mostly use screws, don't they? Even as someone ignorant about ships, and according to the countless educational comics about the Industrial Revolution at my home, ultimately the screw-propelled ship was the victor of the seas. I immediately drew a simple design and showed it to Raleigh's various shipwrights. Although it looked childish, like an upside-down fan attached to a boat, they all quickly grasped my intention. Indeed, this would allow us to move freely without having to row or rely on capricious winds. That's right. So how about adopting this design for building the new steamboat? What's wrong? An ambiguous expression appears on the shipwrights' faces. As I tilted my head, one of them speaks. It seems like a good design, but there are anticipated problems. Problems, you say? Huh? How could that be? It's a conclusion copied from the future's answer. As I wondered, another shipwright continued, water will likely leak into the boat through the gap where that rotating shaft is inserted. Besides, making this screw doesn't look easy either. Lack of water tightness. Water could rise into the boat through the screw's rotating shaft. Also, looking at the structure, the draft seems deep, but isn't the new steamboat going to navigate rivers and their coasts, not the sea? It doesn't seem easy to navigate in such shallow waters. Deep draft. A structure that could hinder movement over shallow riverbeds. How perplexing. When we actually made a small model and floated it, problems kept emerging, like debris near the surface getting tangled around the screw. Clearly, that structure seems correct, but our technology doesn't quite reach it yet. I experienced the bitter taste of things not going as planned after a long time. Anyway, for now, humanity's first steam screw-propelled ship design was discarded. But that didn't stop progress. I had a plan B. Since things had come to this, we had no choice but to follow the form of early steamboats that appear there as well. I quietly returned from the Chesapeake shipyard site to Crotone and turned on my computer. I had received help before when making clippers. I get help again. With a click sound, violin music played, and text appeared on the screen. Anno 1800. Of course, a city management game set in the 19th century. Perfect for the help I need right now. Chapter 280. The Power to Block Waves 1. Anno 1800. a recent installment in the well-received Anno series, a masterpiece in the city-building and strategy genre. It's been out for about 405 years in the future. Ugh, that feels strange. Anyway, the game itself is worth playing. I've probably spent over 100 hours on it since I like the 19th century setting and the graphics are pretty decent. Anyway, in this game, where you grow your own city set in the 19th century, you can interact with other cities and factions through navigation, and the ships used then are exactly from around the 19th to 20th centuries, making it perfect for reference. Especially since our technological capabilities related to steam engines awkwardly straddle the period from the 18th to early 19th centuries. Of course, this isn't an educational comic, so there are no particularly detailed blueprints here. It just gives a modest understanding of what kinds of ships existed in this era. You're attaching water wheels to both sides of the ship? That's right, and the engine in the middle moves those wheel axles. But that was enough. Sometimes just the overall shape can help one guess the general principles. The paddle wheeler's operation would be apparent to anyone just by looking at its exterior. A vessel with water wheels, paddles, attached to the outside of the hull, gaining propulsion by rotating them to push water away. Even with my limited knowledge, I could understand why this design became obsolete. First of all, compared to the small and neat screw of a screw-propelled ship, those paddles are much larger and cumbersome. Moreover, if waves suddenly surge or weather turns bad with rain, the paddles would be submerged deeply then shallowly, having their performance. No matter how I looked at it, the screw-propelled ship seemed far superior and more excellent in structure. If that weren't the case, I would have seen paddle wheelers more often. But I've never seen a paddle wheeler except as toys. However, at the same time, I could understand why early steamboats adopted this paddle wheel propulsion method. First, isn't the structure simple? They've just replaced where rowers would sit with paddle wheels, making the operating principle intuitive. Also, since the paddle wheel axis needs to be submerged just enough to not be fully submerged, the draft is shallow. In other words, it's good for navigating shallow waters. If it's difficult to handle in rough seas or unfavorable climate conditions, why not just use it in rivers or coastal areas? I immediately showed the shipwrights the special vessels from Anno 1800, the Great Eastern and the salvage ship, and said, "Don't think about the ironclad structure here. Just consider the overall shape of the ship. First, we attach huge paddle wheels on both sides, and on the other hand, we add sails in case the fuel runs out. What do you think, then? Oh, how interesting. So we attach wheels to both sides." This time, the shipwright's reaction was good. And so we took another step toward building humanity's first steamboat. But there's a crane attached to this salvage ship below? Ah, yes. What purpose should we build it for? Well, since we're now building breakwaters, bridges, and roads. For building breakwaters and bridges. It's a specialized vessel for underwater construction. There's something to move with that crane. Namely, this looks like a sea urchin egg abstracted by Plato. What an elegant expression, Harriet. Let's set aside the small talk and proceed with the experiment. Pour water into the breakwater model. Tetrapods. Tetrapod. A concrete structure in the shape of a pointed tetrahedron with 4 branches. It's what you often see at the coast, with spiky objects tangled together forming a breakwater. Kin Issei only knew the name briefly and had no idea exactly how it worked or how much better it was than previous breakwaters. If he hadn't thought, since it came out in modern times, it must be superior, he would have directed them to build embankments in the traditional way instead. However, the advantages of tetrapods were clear in many ways. Breakwaters installed by gathering gravel and rocks in the previous method are easily swept away by waves. In other words, they must be maintained and repaired periodically at enormous cost. In contrast, breakwaters made of tetrapods are firmly intertwined with each other, making them much less likely to scatter or collapse compared to traditional breakwaters. Their wave-blocking power is also superior. Structurally, a tetrapod breakwater with numerous gaps allows seawater to flow through those gaps, appropriately offsetting the power of waves to maintain its structure. Of course, fishermen who insist on fishing where they shouldn't sometimes fall through those gaps. Anyway, specifically, its wave-blocking power is several times superior to existing breakwaters. Therefore, this type of breakwater was perfect for withstanding and offsetting the nearly lawless waves and rough currents of Pamlico Sound. This was also proven in the experiment Harriet conducted with a small model. If they poured soil and gravel in the traditional way into the rough Pamlico Sound, it would be swept away instantly. Moreover, tetrapods are easy to mass transport. The blacksmiths of Roanoke Island are preparing massive molds, 3 to 4 meters high. Probably once concrete is poured into those molds and the molds are disassembled, tetrapods will be completed instantly. Being able to continuously supply materials of uniform size and quality was a big advantage. This was also advantageous compared to digging up random gravel and piling it up. And there was one more special advantage of tetrapods that would only apply in the Virginia community situation. Is the concrete supply going well? How are you all handling the mixing ratios? Yes, nameless one. We're slowly adjusting the mixing ratios between materials. That is, it's made of concrete. By around the 17th century, the use of concrete begins to increase, but it's still not that common. So it's natural that the technicians here, including Kin Issei, don't know what materials to mix to make concrete hard or what ratio to mix for longevity. And tetrapods served as training and experimental subjects for such concrete pouring methods. Since tetrapods are consumables anyway, ruining one or two wouldn't cause major problems. Thus, as research on concrete began in earnest, they also started digging to lay roads for the first time in Chesapeake.